gargled to itself, bored. She went back upstairs and put the postcards on her bedside table. It was only then that she saw the picture on the front. It was an ugly gargoyle, carved in stone and hung up on some French church, its tongue sticking out and its eyes bulging. It was so ugly, so silly, so ludicrous that it made her smile. They were put there to keep evil spirits away, she had read, that and to be drain pipes for the church roof. She felt slightly better for seeing it. Maybe the gargoyle was working, even just a picture of it. And as she looked, she saw that it wasn't as ugly as she had first thought. Sure, everything was out of proportion, was distorted, like in the political cartoons in the newspaper. But there was something likable about the gargoyle, something mischievous perhaps. In an odd way, it remembered her of Nick. They didn't look the same, save for a similar dusky grey skin tone, but still there was something. She hoped Nick would be able to keep bad luck away too, and so the morning went on. Frank was playing Lego with Hector. They had all the pieces tipped out on a blanket in the front room and were searching for bits of just the right size to complete their models. It was raining outside. The day had turned grey to match her mood. There was a banging at the front door, and that didn't sound like a postman. Her dad was upstairs cleaning the bathroom. She could hear his jangly old music playing on the radio. He obviously hadn't heard the door, so Frank carefully set down her half-finished spaceship and answered it. She was surprised to find Nick looming on the front step, dripping wet. His bike lay on the path, and he left it there as he stepped indoors. "You are soaked," Frank said, hoping the worry she felt wasn't showing in her voice. "What are you doing here?" He was agitated. "I didn't know where else to go, so I came here, Frank. I think something happened." He pulled a crumpled envelope out of his pocket. She shut the door. "You'd best take your shoes off," she said. "Dad has only just hoovered." He handed her the envelope and bent down to undo his laces. She didn't know if she was supposed to open it or not, so she just looked at the front. In thick felt tip, it said Nicholas Underbridge. That wasn't that surprising, but it meant that the letter hadn't come through the post. There was no stamp and no address on there, just his name. A fat raindrop had blurred the ink in the middle of the underbridge. "Someone shoved it through the door this morning," he said. "Look inside." She turned it over and lifted the flap. It didn't look like it had been stuck down at all, just tucked in. She pulled the sheet of paper out and unfolded it. Her stomach turned over and said, "Look, Frank, he's dripping on the carpet. Tell him to get lost. Tell him to take his letter with him." Written there in the same ugly, felt-tip writing was an internet address, a URL, and glued to the sheet of paper made up from cut-up pieces of newspaper was the sentence. "We are watching you, freak." It looked like a ransom note from an old TV show. "What's there?" Frank said, pointing at the URL. "We don't have the internet," Nick said. "I don't know." "You don't want to look," said Frank's stomach. "Go have a lie down, maybe." "Pull the curtains. Go to bed." At the back of the house, behind the dining room, her mom had a little office. She didn't use it much because she was usually away working, but sometimes, especially at the weekends, when she needed to catch up something or deal with what she had just been told in one of her dinner interrupting phone calls, she would hide herself away in there and grumble. Frank let Nick in, waving a little Hector in a friendly, smiley way as they passed through the front room, and switched on the power. The computer whirred and the monitor hummed into life. She carefully typed the address into the browser. When the page loaded, a video began playing. The footage was shaky, obviously shot on a phone. On the screen was a film shot at the back of Nick's house. It was almost dark, late evening perhaps, or early morning. The camera was tiptoeing up to the long, low windows of the cellar, and there, coming into view, was Nick's mom. It wasn't clear, it wasn't really obvious unless you knew what you were seeing, but there, in that basement room, something large was moving, something person-shaped, something not exactly human. A hand came into shot and began to tug at the bottom of the window. It shifted and lifted up a few centimeters. Someone behind the camera muttered something wordless, and a second hand slapped at the first. The window fell shut with a small thud. The camera wise round showed Neil Noble's face for a fraction of a second before he covered the lens with his hand, saying, "Don't film me, you idiot." Then there was a crackle and the video ended. Frank sat back in silence and switched the computer off. They were both, it seemed, too stunned to speak. She heard Nick's stomach rumble, but hers said nothing. Eventually, Nick broke the silence. He looked paler than ever. "They had never really noticed me before," he said. "Not really, not especially. Never cared enough to have a go, I guess. No challenge, but now? Well, now I've become an irritation, haven't I? I know they have been bullying you." Frank flinched at the B word. "And now they've moved on to me because I helped." "Their sort hate people who help, Frank, which is why you have to help. They must have come back last night looking to make trouble, and instead they found..." As he trailed off, Frank said, "I hated them, Nick. I hated them so much." "What if the papers find out?" Nick said. "What if Dad reads it in the papers? Imagine the headline, 'Monsters in our midst.' He will kill me. No one is meant to know. If it gets out, I'll lose." He was interrupted by a scream in the front room. They ran back to the lounge as soon as Hector started bowling. He had a nosebleed and a long piece of Lego sticking out of one nostril. He was dripping blood down his t-shirt. "Dad!" Frank shouted. For a while, she thought they might have to go to hospital to have the flat wound by Sixer removed. But her dad managed to ease it out with a little bit of wiggling and promises of chocolate. "When I was a boy, I remember once," he began as he waved the liberated piece of plastic in the air. Frank stopped listening and trudged upstairs to get Hector a clean top. She sat on his bed and rootled through his drawers and thought about what she had just seen. Not the Lego business, but a video. Her first instinct was to own up and tell Nick that it was her fault, but her second instinct was to hide under the duvet and never come out again. If he found out what she had done, she would never want to see her again, wouldn't want to be her friends anymore. He would be so upset and angry, and rightly so. Her third instinct, after overhearing the second instinct, said, "But that would be okay, wouldn't it? You didn't want to be his friend in the first place, did you?" "But it is not as simple as that," she replied. "It rarely is," said her third instinct, before it shuffled off into the shadows, whistling.